Our final speaker, Clare, is from University of Western Australia. He's tell us about what's changing in what's being stolen. Please welcome Joe.
Thank you. Is that the figure?
Yeah.
No problem. Is this working? The big green button, yeah? There we go. Okay. Right. Thank you all for hanging around. I really appreciate it. I'm not going to show you big complicated models. I'm going to show you lots of pretty pictures. So hopefully they'll keep everyone going until lunchtime. So hang in with me. What I want to show you is about what's been being stolen from burglaries in Western Australia between 2007 and 2017. And I want to talk to you about why I think it's interesting that we look at the information that we've already got and try and make sense of these trends. So before I start, just want to thank the WA Police for making all of this data available to me for the work that I'm going to show you today. What I want to cover, I'll start with some stuff that I believe and things that I think we already know. And then I want to tell you some other things that I think are important that you understand as far as sort of global trends in some things that might be being stolen. I'm going to show you the data, talk to you about the data that I've got, and the sort of 2 or 3 broad sort of hypotheses that I've got that I think are worth looking at to try and make sense of the patterns that we've got. I'll show you the pretty pictures, and then I'll tell you why I think we should care about this and why I think it matters. So what do we already know? I am from a school of thought that not everybody in criminology believes in, but I believe in the fact that opportunity is what causes crime. And so there are 10 principles about the opportunity sort of crime relationship. If you're interested in this, you should read this paper by Marcus Felsen and Ron Clark that goes back to 1998, and they've been writing about this stuff for the last 30 years. But the 3 things that I want to talk to you about the most at the start here are summarised in the red box. So I want to talk about the fact that some products offer more tempting opportunities for crime than others. I want to talk to you about the influence of social and sort of technological changes on the things that will be attractive for people to steal and the things that present crime opportunities. And then the key bit is that all of this connects up with opportunity reduction sort of strategies and things that we could do to try and drive down crime once we've sort of looked at the non-randomness that we see when we look across these patterns. So if I start with this first idea that some products offer more tempting crime opportunities than others, and the acronym, if anyone's read Clark's work, he likes acronyms for lots of things. So the one he's come up with for this is the craved idea. So what he says is that at any particular time, not all products are equally sort of suitable or attractive for people who want to steal things, right? So this makes sense. Craved explains that people who are wanting to take things are looking for stuff that's concealable, removable. You've got to be able to take it away with you if you want to steal it. It's got to be available. It's got to be available at a sort of high level, sort of macro sense in the community, and then it also has to be available in that micro immediate sense of where they are in time and place. They have to be able to actually access that thing. It has to have some value. If it's not valuable, arguably there's not worth stealing. Anna's in the room here. We did some work in 2005 where we asked burglars in WA, what do you do with the stuff that you steal? And about half of it they were trading directly with drug dealers, but the point for stealing stuff was not necessarily to have the things themselves, it was to be able to do something with it afterwards. So the value is really important. If you do want to keep stuff for yourself, it's got to be enjoyable. And value and disposability are sort of partners, 2 sides of a coin, in the sense that I've got to be able to get rid of this thing, turn it into something that has some sort of utility if the point is that I want to have cash or drugs, be able to do something, finance something that I couldn't do before. So Melanie Wellsmith did some work that was published in the British Journal in 2005, and I'll show you some graphs out of their study, but what they looked at was burglaries between 1997 and 2003 in one particular area of the UK. And they came up with this idea that some things are stable, craved items in the sense of it's jewellery, it's gold, cash, it's stuff that you can do things with without needing to sort of sell it onto a third party necessarily. And some things are variable craved. And what she was looking at over the time, particularly were small electronic goods. So across all of the burglaries that she examined in this study, Cash and jewellery were the most frequently reportedly stolen items in that particular 6-year, 7-year window that they looked at, with cash being taken from about 40% of the burglaries that people reported, jewellery being taken around 31% of the time, so 1 in 3 of the burglaries that occurred. Aidan Sidebottom from Richard's place at JDI, he did some great work that's now came out in around 2011, showing the influence of external factors that motivate the sense of whether people are going to see whether it's worth stealing precious metals like copper. And what he showed was that what we've got here is the copper thefts of the lighter line. I don't know if I've got a zapper on here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is global copper prices on the stock market, and then what this shows over time is the likelihood of people wanting to steal copper, the amount of copper that was being stolen over those period of time. So you can see the external motivation, the price that the global market was commanding at that particular time was influencing the extent to which copper was a craved item that people wanted to steal. We also know that social, technological changes present new opportunities and influence this sort of craved cycle. So again, Will Smith, I'm not an economist, but Will Smith helps explain that products go through a very sort of consistent type process as far as the life cycle that they go through, from the attractiveness of people who may or may not want to steal things or may not want to buy things. So we go through this innovation phase, a growth phase, mass market, and then we get to this point where there's saturation in the market and basically everybody who wants one has already got one. So this is the data from Will Smith's study. And what we can see over time here, 97 to 2003, the big red line at the top here is showing the percentage of cash, burglaries where cash was stolen. The declining type products here, I use this in lectures for children now, they're 19, 18 years old, and I talk to them about things like VCRs and big stereo centres that you set up in your house, and they look at me with a blank look on their face because they don't know what any of these things did. But what you can see between 97 and 2003 is already there was this declining likelihood of these products being stolen if there was a burglary that occurred, right? Because technology was changing. What was occurring over the same period of time was DVDs, and DVD players were becoming something that people wanted to replace VCRs with. And believe it or not, there was actually a time when we didn't all own a mobile phone, and around 2000 was probably around the tipping point where they were starting to become much more common. And as you can see over time, this was a target that was being stolen from residential burglaries, and it increased as there was more of these available in the community. So burglars were stealing things that matched the sort of product life cycle that was available in the community. And that's what this graph shows here. So over time, this is just ownership levels of these particular types of items. So colour TVs were at a saturation by 1996. VCRs, the same thing. There's no reason to steal one because everybody's got one who wants one. You can see mobile phones back in 96 weren't even an item that was recorded by this survey, and then up by sort of 2001, 2002, around 70% of households had at least one of these particular items. So the trends match the sort of market availability. The market availability matches what people in the community are buying generally anyway. The argument that Will Smith put forward was that products were most vulnerable in this sort of growth, mass market stages relative to when they hit the saturation point, when nobody's going to buy an illegitimate example of this product because they can already access, they've already got one, they bought one themselves already. The last sort of thing that I want to explain in this sort of opening part of the talk is the fact that opportunities for crime can be reduced. There's hundreds of successful studies now on popcenter.org, lots of what works in policing and crime prevention things that you can go and see. So, you know, if it wasn't true, we wouldn't do all these sorts of things around locks and keeping money in safe places and all these types of things. This is where situational crime prevention comes in. It helps explain how we can adjust opportunity structures to make it less likely that people are going to be able to successfully utilise that opportunity to commit a crime. The security hypothesis has been put forward by Farrell and Tilley and their sort of colleagues, and they provided very sort of compelling argument to explain how improved security has been the main driver for a reduction in the global crime drop. It's a very parsimonious explanation. It can help explain sort of different time signatures and temporal trends around the world about when crime started to decline. There's loads of work that they've done and published from about 2010. But security seems to definitely be part of what's going on, and it works particularly well for vehicle theft and the introduction of electronic immobilisers. So to show you some data around sort of trends in the UK, this is what's been happening from sort of domestic burglary in a dwelling. So this is the percentage of all houses. This is looking at the crime survey of England and Wales. And just onto this bit, they weren't doing it annually, so I've sort of, the black dots show you the actual estimates they produced from surveys, and then I've sort of filled in the blanks to make it a bit easier to see. But in 1993 in the UK, about 6.5% of houses on any given year said that they were a victim of a burglary. And then by 2018, it's dropped down to 1.7% of houses saying they're experiencing a burglary over the same sort of 12-month period. And we can see it's just been a very sort of steady decline over there. Now, from a security perspective, what we can see is this is showing the percentage of these burglaries that experienced entry, again using the crime survey England and Wales. And particularly from this point where it started to tip, we can see that there is a reduction, about a 0.8 percentage point decline in the extent to which burglaries were occurring where they were successfully entering a property. So is this security? Probably we could argue that it is. Again, Farrell and colleagues, and this is Saloni's done this paper as the key author, but came out a couple of years ago now. They used this same data from the Crime Survey England and Wales to estimate the extent to which security was influencing the likelihood of a house being a victim of a burglary. And the more they looked at different combinations of security techniques and found that there were sort of additive factors, there is an explanation there that is consistent with this idea, to some extent at least, that security is reducing the frequency of burglary. And this is some work done by the Australian Institute of Criminology. Anthony and colleagues looking at the fact that from the Juma survey saying that offenders also think that security is definitely affecting their likelihood of stealing things from property. Stated reasons for the property crime drop and improved security was the biggest one at the front there. But what else matters? What else is important to know? Well, if we go back to the Crime Survey of England and Wales, what we can see here also is that this is the percent of burglaries that occurred where people experienced some sort of loss, right? And around the same sort of time, there starts to be this fairly steady, consistent decline, 7.9 percentage point reduction in burglaries that occurred where people said something was taken. This is the time window that I'm going to be looking at for data from Western Australia. So we're looking down at the end of this sort of trend, if you were thinking of the UK and the crime survey. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the percentage reductions that we're looking at as far as the rate of burglaries are concerned in this particular time. But what might be going on, and what the AIC paper also found some sort of support for, was that there was a change in the stolen goods market that was available to people, and that maybe was a partial explanation for why there was a reduction in property crime as well. And that's sort of what I want to explore today. So again, looking at the UK crime survey, crime safety survey, England and Wales Home Office report found that responses over this sort of 20-year period, there'd been a decline in the average value of a single theft had declined by about 35%. So thefts, fewer of them are occurring, and also the value of the thefts that people were reporting was going down by almost a third over the same period of time. And they talked about the data that they presented in that paper, going back to the sort of craved hypothesis, talking about things like value, availability, and disposability of the types of goods that are available in houses. So if we look at some Australian trends as far as victim surveys, so now we're going back to 2009-10, we can see that we do get this decline in the absolute number of burglaries that are occurring, but we also get this decline in the absolute number of attempted burglaries that are occurring. Now, if it was just security, I would argue, thinking about this, maybe we would expect to see maybe an increase in attempted burglaries because people are unable to get into properties they're trying to. So maybe there's something else going on as far as this reduction that we're seeing here. If we look at police recorded crime, again, we can see unlawful entry with intent over a sort of the last 7-8 years, a 15% decline in the absolute number of these events that were reported to the ABS. And we see a 4 percentage point decline in UEs with property loss. So again, people are reporting they were broken into, but there's been a reduction in the frequency at which they say something was actually stolen. So I guess my question is, why are people getting in and not taking things, and or why are people not bothering so much to try and break into houses? And this, I think, taps more into that product life cycle stuff than it necessarily may do to do with the security bit. So my first idea, cash is so 2007, right? Who carries cash? Anyone in the room actually got cash in their pocket today? Right? Very few, right? We tap and go everything now. Now this number shows, this is the RBA estimates of the extent to which cash is being used for payments in Australia. And what we can see is this almost linear reduction from about 2007. Lots of countries now are estimating that they're going to be cash-free societies by about 2030. So we're trending in this direction where people don't have money anymore. Now, we don't carry money around with us. Probably most people don't have any money at home. I know we never do. So there's probably less cash in houses. Now, if you think back to the graph I showed you before, cash was the number one thing that was being reported stolen across burglaries in the UK back in 97 to 2003. So this is going to have implications, I think, for the extent to which there are some high-desired, craved items in people's houses, the stable craved item as far as cash is concerned. The second idea is that phones have replaced a lot of other stuff that we used to have or need, right? So I thought this picture presented it beautifully. 20 years later and all these things fit in your pocket. Again, if I showed kids this in my lectures, they probably wouldn't know what most of these things were. Our mobiles do all of these things now, and we carry our mobiles with us all the time, right? So if I'm not home, my phone isn't there either unless I've forgotten it. So there's no cash in my house, there's no phone, and I don't own any of these things. So now I'm starting to think, well, there's probably a lot fewer of these items that are available. Now, this again has implications for the sort of craved possibilities that if you were thinking about what would be there to take, even if I could get into that property when there's nobody there. The other thing that is worth thinking about is that stuff people want gets older quicker. So this product life cycle has changed. And economics type journal, this quote says, technology-based commodities such as mobile phones and computers have shorter innovation cycles so that the previous generation becomes obsolete faster, either functionally or psychologically. So we want the new one, and they're always bringing a new one out, and so the value of things is reducing so much quicker. Product life cycle in the electronic industry is shorter than before due to technological advances, and as a result, an outdated product could reach its end of use even if it's still in good condition. So this isn't about functionality anymore, this is the fact that it's been replaced. So I think stuff is getting older quicker, which again has implications not necessarily for the availability, because these things might be in homes, but to do with the value or the disposability of items. If no one wants to buy it, if it's the old one, right? I want the new one. And stuff gets old much quicker than it used to. So this is my data, my hypotheses. I don't have data for security changes. We don't have the equivalent questions from the Crime Survey England and Wales. So I'm not looking at that today, but also it seems like there's other things going on anyway. So what I want to focus on is looking within properties and thinking about craved, and I'm actually only interested in the AVD as a sort of starting point for the stuff I want to look at. So my hypotheses are there's less availability related stuff. So more burglaries with no loss are being reported, either because cash is declining in use, so there's less cash available in houses, or phones have replaced other suitable targets that might have been there previously, so cameras, tablets, stereos, e-readers, these types of things. The second idea I'll show you some data for is that there's this sort of valuable disposability related trends. There are very short periods of attractiveness for very high value electronic goods, and they're rapidly replaced on the legitimate market, which means that there's no market for them in the stolen goods market as well. So these are my two ideas. This is the data that I've got, nearly 300,000 burglaries in WA over a sort of 11-year period. 190,000 of them had loss that was recorded, so about 2/3 of the burglaries. And the items that were reported stolen across those burglaries, about 1.29 million different things that I was looking at. We found patterns that I would expect as far as repeat victimisation, a very small number of properties that experienced multiple burglaries. Cash and jewellery were still the most taken things across this data set if you look at it just on aggregate. So 31% of burglaries reported cash being stolen, 22% of burglaries reported jewellery. So these are still the things that we would have expected just to sort of validate the data. These are the graphs, and then we can go and have some lunch. So burglary with no loss, this is my first hypothesis. So what we're looking at here is the rate of burglaries over this period of time, a 0.5 percentage point decline. So it's still going down, but it's going down relatively moderately compared to where it might have started. Burglaries with loss, we can see that there's a 1 percentage point decline. Now that's from this point to here. It would be a bit bigger, but I didn't cherry pick the highest number just because it's going down anyway. But you can see there's been a trend, particularly since about 2009, that it really has sort of been declining over that period. What's happening as far as cash and jewellery being stolen per burglary? So if we look at cash, we can see the percentage of burglaries where cash is being stolen, so this is this axis over here, starts to decline pretty clearly. Our jewellery rate stays pretty much the same, and if we map it in relation to the RBA cash usage, we can see that there's a really strong correlation between what the RBA is saying as far as cash usage for general transactions and cash being reported stolen from burglaries in houses. So it seems like there's a link between those two things, no link between cash usage and jewellery being stolen in these properties. Now, there was a tipping point from this RBA estimate said that in around 2013, we were using tap and go or credit cards for transactions that were $22 or more. This has continued to decline, and now I think we probably use it for almost everything. You can see that that's probably when there was an even sharper sort of trend as far as what we're looking at here. What about the second part of my sort of availability hypothesis, this idea of the impact of phones? So we can see this is the percentage of burglary prevalence, so how many burglaries within each house experience some sort of mobile phone theft over that period of time. Again, you can see there's a decline. This is the trend as far as digital cameras were concerned, and you can see that the sort of link between these two, a very strong correlation between the trends of these two different theft items. What happened here around high resolution smartphones started to kick in, which meant that probably people could use their phones for a whole load of things that they didn't need a digital camera for. And this is when biometric security started to become mainstream on phones, so then it became, for a different reason, it was probably less attractive to steal somebody's mobile phone because it was harder to do anything with. What about the second hypothesis, so the value, disposability? What I've looked at here is gaming consoles. Across the data set, computer equipment was about 10% of the stuff that was reported stolen, and within that, these particular gaming consoles I'm going to show you made up about 6% of all of the computer equipment that was stolen in this period of time. Now, this is some global trends as far as the sort of units of sales per million. These are legitimate sales in all these different types of gaming products. And it shows generally there's been a sort of decline, flattening out, and you can see across this different time period, there's obviously a whole lot of different products that were available depending on what was being released and where they were in their product life cycle. So if we have a look at the trends, firstly for theft, looking at Xbox 360, Xbox One, Nintendo Wii, you can see they're released at different times. They have different sales, these are different theft signatures as far as what was being reported stolen from the burglaries in our sample. And you can see that this is matched up with the global sales trends for these, each of these particular items. So you can see the time signature seems to match well, that the theft lags just behind what was going on as far as the trends to do with the legitimate sales of these products. If we have a look at PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PSP, the PlayStation Portable, again, this is the trends as far as theft are concerned, and this is the trends as far as global sales figures for these particular items are concerned. So these figures, when I was looking at them, came out so well I thought that maybe I'd made them up myself, but thankfully this is all the data from that graph that I showed you just before, and all it's correlated, looking at the trends overlaid with these different particular items. What if we go back to looking, so this is, shows us the value of burgled consoles, the estimated value in the ones in WA, and this is the sale million units, again looking at the same graphs for these, the 6 particular gaming consoles that I showed you. This graph shows us worldwide digital camera shipments. You can see again they were increasing, and then smartphones came in around 2007, and then they fell off a cliff, right? So if we again look at and we map that on top of the same graph that we looked at before, you can see that there's a strong link between camera thefts and global camera shipments, where they both declined around the same time. And interestingly, this is around when Instagram became a thing that people were probably using their phones for even more, so there's no reason. So not only were cameras not being stolen, but they weren't being sold on the global market. So again, we can see a link between these particular things. And this might be why people break into camera shops now and try and scam actual digital camera dealers to get the brand new technology, which is right at the start of its product life cycle, rather than bothering trying to break into people's homes. So who cares? There's been a decline in burglary with loss in WA. There's less cash being taken, and that matches the patterns around cash usage. There's no equivalent reduction in jewellery theft. There's fewer cameras being stolen. This aligns with smartphone production. There's fewer phones being stolen as well, which is reduced probably in line with biometric security. All of this making something less available, less valuable, you can't use it. The shorter product life cycle stuff also seems to influence the demand for very specific stolen goods. So the value is determined by where that product is in its legitimate life cycle, and there's obvious time signatures that match that. So it's really important to look within particular property trends to see what particular items are doing at any particular time. Implications for theory. So making things less available sort of within properties and less disposable and less valuable is likely going to have an effect on reducing offender motivation to commit burglaries. This idea is completely compatible with the security hypothesis that Farrell and colleagues have been talking about, so it's not at odds with any of that. But it's also compatible with explanations for offending behaviour that rely on maybe domain-specific expertise or just sort of general perceived utility from a sort of economic perspective. So offenders have this reduced opportunity to learn how to be an effective burglar. There's fewer available targets at this sort of macro and the micro level, and there's less chance to gain some sort of financial reward from what they're doing. An increase in no-result burglaries and or failed attempts to sell items when you do take them may well influence the perceived utility of a burglary in the future. So if you take a whole load of stuff and your drug dealer says, I'm not taking any of that, it's not worth anything, then you might think, I don't know whether it's worth breaking into a house moving forward. And reducing the attractiveness generally of both of these things could help maybe drive down crime moving forward. So from a practical perspective, there's clear implications for targeted prevention. This fits within the situational crime prevention sort of frameworks. It's completely consistent with opportunity-based theory. We should be doing things to try and design in, create techniques to reduce the disposability of stolen goods, the market reductions approach stuff that Sutton talks about. So phone kill switches, mobilisers, do things to reduce the capacity to which people can sell stolen metal, register bikes. We should do stuff to try and disrupt the stolen goods market, and we need to look at the traditional markets and also emerging markets, e-markets, and we should be using current trends around what's being stolen from burglaries and from shops to help prioritise the focus of where we put our resources about trying to fight these types of crimes. And the beauty of being able to prevent crime in this way is that there are these long-term sustainable crime prevention sort of benefits without needing arrest or conviction, much the same way that car immobilisers have had an impact on car theft. So where to next? I need to use the sort of available data to monitor trends. I think we should be finding out more about stolen goods markets in other places in Australia over the same period of time. The more that we know, the more able we'll be to disrupt these markets. We need to also see what's been increasing within the trends as far as property. I want to look across different jurisdictions, consider displacement. There is some sense that there's been a small increase in the extent to which burglaries are resulting in vehicle thefts in WA. And also consider a link with repeat victimisation and repeat victimisation prevention. So what's being taken at these separate events, the timing between burglaries, the value of items, those types of things. And that's it.
Any questions? One, two.
Did you come across any data in relation to trends with the theft of identification documents?
There's definitely within there was an increase in papers being reported being stolen, and I need to look at that a bit more to find out what that is. Wallets and purses are still being stolen, so that would have obviously driver's licenses and things in there. But are you thinking of passports and stuff like that?
I'm thinking of anything that could lead to identity theft.
Oh, that's interesting. Don't know. I hadn't even thought about that. Good question. The honest truth is about 8 days ago I hadn't done any of this, so I'm glad it worked out the way it did. But that's a really good idea. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, in terms of considering the shift towards digital property and sort of online property theft, have you considered looking at this from the perspective of the sort of increases in that space, or do you think you have enough data to do anything to actually understand how those types of property crimes, when it's in the digital space, have been increasing, given that a lot of it's not really visible if sort of banks are covering that type of crime?
So do you mean like tap and go fraud and things? Is that what you're talking about?
Basically a lot of online property theft. So, you know, even if you consider, you know, older styles of phone scams or tapping into people's bank accounts, anything that allows them to sort of steal digital forms of property rather than physical property, which, as we know, is no longer as readily available. So, supporting all of this hypothesis, but, you know, in line with the transition to digital property like identity documents or...
I haven't. I've only got burglary data here, and that may well not be captured within the West Australian Police. That particular stuff that you're talking about might be under a different crime classification. It would totally be worth looking at, and I would encourage people to do exactly that. I don't think it's the same people who would be busting into houses. I think it's a different skill set. And there's sort of some literature now saying offenders become they develop expertise at what they're doing. And just because you can't get anything out of value out of a house doesn't mean that you can effectively, run a sort of phishing scam online. So, but I would encourage people to look at exactly what is happening because I suspect there'll be the non-randomness that we see everywhere else.
I got one question from the front and then two at the back.
I guess my question was something along the same lines of what you're just talking about there. If it's harder to break into a house and it's not really worth the effort to break into the house, what are they doing instead? I mean,
good question.
This hasn't been looked at fully, but what are they doing instead, and or are we seeing fewer people who actually want to do it?
Well, we know there's been a huge reduction in young people offending since about 2007, and year on year it's declining. So I suspect there are some people who just aren't committing crimes anymore that might have done in the past. There's fewer young people, not just in Australia, but in a number of Western countries that are seeing the similar trends. We don't really know why that's happening. So I suspect for some people they're not doing this anymore. But we've also seen some sort of, recently there's been increase of things like break into cars, like theft from cars and shoplifting offences, things like that. So it may be that people have just displaced to a certain extent. If they still need money from theft, maybe they're going to places and trying in different ways. That would be my idea. But pretty much, Richard can tell me if I'm wrong with this, but the stuff that I've seen reading about displacement effects would still say that the net reduction that we've seen from taking away one opportunity doesn't 100% translate to people just doing the same volume of things in other places. So that's why the opportunity reduction approach is so good, because we can actually fix things that are non-random and it doesn't just squeeze the balloon and push it somewhere else. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks. I was just wondering if WAPOL provided you with any data pertaining to firearms theft from domestic addresses?
If it's, from burglaries, I would have it. I haven't looked at it, but it would definitely be in there. I don't have I've got a unique identifier for each address, but I don't know where any of the properties are, but they do, and I could look at that. Yeah, do you think that's an issue in your, you work for the police? Is that, you're in your policing area?
No, I actually work for the Shooting Industry Foundation of Australia.
Oh, interesting.
So we do advocacy, research, safety, promotion and education.
Okay.
And obviously we're really interested in safe storage of firearms in domestic locations, and interested also in complete data sets from law enforcement that can enable us to develop industry policies and standards.
Okay. Yeah, well, I would have it in there for sure, provided they've coded it properly. That's where I'm, I'm a victim of whatever they write down.
So we are running a bit of our time. Can I just take one last question from the gentleman at the back?
Yeah, the National Motor Vehicle Theft Reduction Council is a little unit in Melbourne, and they talk a lot about car keys being stolen from houses, and they say that it started in WA and that trend is coming east. Have you not got anything about that?
Yeah, I do. There has been a very small increase in so burglaries where keys are being stolen, and there's also been an increase where it's only keys that are being, like that's the only thing that was, and the car, sorry, so yeah, the car was the only thing taken from the burglary. But it's relatively infrequent compared to the volume of other burglaries that we're dealing with, so it's still quite a small percentage, but it's something I'm interested in finding out more about it, because we get repeat victimisation for those properties. There are some properties where they've had like 4 or 5 cars stolen over this sort of 11-year period, which is starting to feel very non-random for me as far as what's going on in that particular place. But I don't know where they got their data from, because I don't think the cops have really been looking at any of this stuff. So is it from insurance reports?
I believe they went into WA policing, and they actually looked at ACT policing as well. But
Okay, yeah, right. I know the police aren't looking at this really at the moment, so they were interested in giving it to me just so they could find out what's in there. So.
I think I'll take one last question from Anna.
There you are.
It was okay. I would have just asked Joe after. Joe, that was a great talk. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you,
One
Anna.
of the things I'm wondering if you can get the level of detail of data and you're talking about, because we know the crime drop's not equally distributed across space.
Yep.
And that some areas are actually feeling experience a crime increase, or at least a crime, stabilisation. Have you been able to look at any of that in terms of these global trends?
Yeah, I think I've got in this data set, I'm pretty sure I've got policing jurisdictions and stuff, maybe even suburb level data, so I would be able to have a look and see.
When you got more than 8 days, eh?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I'll do it tomorrow. If I forget, please email me and remind me.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much.